and in today's tutorial, we're going to be taking the course. It's actually the very first tutorial right now. The course is ENG122, and we're going to be talking about English sentence, and we're going to be starting with what we call parallelism, and we're going to look at other things as we talk about that. Okay, today's class, I'm not going to be using the whiteboard, as you can see behind me. We're going to use it's going to be more of explanation. So I would encourage you to please pay attention to every details and spit out in this class. All right, it's about to rain heavily outside, and I wouldn't want the generator set to be super hot, so just have to use this option. So I'm going to be as slow as I can. I'm going to be as detailed as I can. With this being said, let's go straight into it. Okay, I think I'm going to adjust this a bit. Oh my goodness, so I think just to save the battery life, so I think yeah, okay, I think this should take us far. Just trying to preserve the battery life of my system so that we can go far a little bit. Okay, I think this is better. It's actually manageable. Just give me a moment. Okay. Okay. Now let's. So we have English sentence. We want to talk about parallelism. Now, when words or word groups perform the same function in the sentence, we say they are in parallel form. Let's take note of that again. When words or word groups perform the same function in the sentence, we say they are in parallel form. Now, parallel forms are used for writing words. Parallel forms are used for writing words or word groups of identical grammatical forms when they appear in a series. Let me take that again. Parallel forms are used for writing words or word groups of identical, grammatical forms when they appear in a series. Now let's take a look at this. Parallel structures help to what? Emphasize. Parallel structures help to emphasize the grammatical and logical relationship of ideas that are expressed. Now we're talking about English sentence, and we're taking our bearing from what we call parallelism. And speaking of parallelism, we've been able to establish the fact that parallelism or parallel words can use both interchangeably. Forms are used for writing words or group of words of identical grammatical forms when they appear in a series. Now let's continue. Now, when we talk about parallel grammatical structure, all right, it reinforces one's thoughts. Parallel grammatical structures reinforces one's thoughts by expressing the importance of various sentence elements. Okay, it reinforces one's thoughts by what? Stressing the importance of the various sentence elements. Now, many of the famous phrases in English exemplifies effective use of parallel structures. Now, let's see some examples. Examples of parallel structures we have: democracy is a government. Now, from what I'm about to say, please underline it. That is what we're talking about here, the parallel structures of the people, by the people, for the people. Look at that. 3 prepositional phrases: of the people, by the people, and for the people. Three, what? Prepositional phrases. Now, we've been talking about parallel structures. Remember we said something like forms, grammatical forms, when they appear in a series. Now you see, of the people, by the people, for the people. Did you notice that? Words in series. Now let's take another example. Now it says here that what people value most are life, liberty, and happiness. Three nouns. What people, now look at it here, just underline it from life, liberty, and happiness. Now let's take okay, we have that as that. So now when you hear of parallelism, you're simply talking about forms of words or grammatical structures that would help to express the thoughts. Okay, help to express the thoughts and emphasizes, all right, the importance of the elements in various sentences. And it's also said to be the forms that are used for writing words or word group of identical forms when they appear in a series. And we've taken examples like democracy is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And we also took the example of what people value most are life, liberty, and happiness. Just like we have statement that says, you know, the major uh, thing we look out for in life when we talk about food, we talk about shelter, we talk about clothing, right? That's also another good example of parallelism. So we have that as that. Now let's continue. Okay, just a moment. All right, so we have what we call fragmentation. Fragmentation. Now, when we say fragmentation, what are we talking about? Fragmentation. Now, let me spell that out. That's FRAGMENTATION. Please, as you join the stream, do well to use this smart like button, and also do well to say hello, hi, or something on the comment section so we can acknowledge your presence. Okay, so we have Miss Tasha Z says, good evening, sir. Good evening, Miss Tasha. It's great to have you on board. Okay, now let's continue. Now, speaking of fragmentation, fragmentation describes a situation where one of the essential parts of a sentence is absent. A situation where one of the what essential part of a sentence is absent. Then we talk about fragmentation. Now, often the incomplete sentence is punctuated as if it were a complete sentence. Now, it is easy to recognize a fragment since either the subject or the predicate is often missing. Now, in a situation whereby the subject, remember we talked about subject matter, we talked about topic sentence in 100 level first semester, speaking about the theme. Okay, now speaking of fragmentation here, he said it's often the incomplete sentence is punctuated, right? In a situation whereby a sentence is presented as complete, even though it is not complete. Now it says here, often incomplete sentence is punctuated as if it were complete sentence. Now it is easy to recognize a fragment since either the subject or the predicate is often missing. Now speaking of predicates, what are we talking about? Predicate is said to be a part of a sentence or clause. Predicate is said to be a part of a sentence or clause. Okay, a part of a sentence or clause containing a verb and starting something about the subject. Okay, underline the keyword. All right, a part of that sentence or clause containing the verb and starting something about the subject and the verb. Now, we talk about fragmentation, okay? Another cause of fragmentation is the confusion between finite and non-finite verb, okay? Another confusion, all right, what things that leads to what we call fragmentation is said to be the confusion between the finite and non-finite verb. Now, speaking of the finite and non-finite verb, now non-finite verbs are those which cannot occur alone. Verbs that cannot occur alone. Talking about the non-finite verb, all right, verbs that can not occur alone as verb elements in clauses because they cannot take the subject. Now, they are called infinite. We have examples are like to go, to be, all right, and some of the participles are going, being, gone, all right, and the other being, which is being. Now, what are we saying here in essence? We're trying to explain between finite and infinite verb, speaking of the non-finite and speaking of the finite verbs. And why are we talking about them? We're trying to explain what it means by fragmentation. And reference is made to finite and infinite verb that if they are confused, right, when they are confused together, it's leads or it's one of the reasons whereby we have fragmentations. And what do we call fragmentation? It is said to be when the essential part of a sentence is missing. Okay. Now we also highlighted the fact that now this essential part that has gone missing often is actually punctuated as if it were a complete sentence, even though it is not a complete one. So now speaking of the finite verb. Now, the finite verb, on the other hand, are full verbs which can occur as verb elements in SE terms, distinctions. Speaking of go, goes, went, I, am, is, was. So these are examples of finite verbs. Now, many times fragmentation results from a wrong choice of verb. Don't forget, we said the confusion or the confusing of a finite and non-finite verb. It's another thing that leads to fragmentation. Now, it says here that many times fragmentation results from a wrong choice of verb. Now, let's take some examples. We have hoping to hear from you soon. We have these are wrong sentences, so we're just going to highlight them. We're going to talk about them. All right. So we have hoping to hear from you soon. We have to control my temper always, and we also have this is my resolution. Now we also have, it says here that in reply to your advertisement in the Pioneer of last week. Also, we have requesting application for the post of clerical assistant. Now, let's readdress these sentences. Now, the first example is a fragment because it has no finite verb. Now, the verb form in the group of the word is a participle. Now, let's go back to what we call, the other time we made mention of examples of participles. Okay, and we have the likes of gone, been, being. We have been, been, and been. We have going, we have gone. Now let's go back to the example, hoping to hear from you soon. Now we have the participle here. Now it says the verb formed in the group of words is a participle. Now it cannot take a subject since the form I. Now the sentence was hoping to hear from you soon. Now here, I hoping to see you soon would not be accepted or acceptable form unless am is included. All right, so it's I am hoping to see you soon. All right, I am hoping to hear from you soon. All right, so now it is said to be missing, and that is why we refer to this as a we refer to this as a fragmentation. Now let's consider some other example. Now we have similarly the verb in form in the verb form in the other example, that's example 8, to control, is said to be an infinite verb. All right, and the verb requesting is also an infinite verb. They are all participle. Now, wrong punctuation can also result in fragmentation. All right. So, speaking of confusing, we talked about confusing finite and infinite verb. Now, we also have here as a wrong punctuations. Okay. We also have wrong punctuations can also result in fragmentations. So, we have that as that. Now, let's talk about dangling modifiers. All right. So we have dangling modifiers. Now, modifiers are said to dangle when they are not consistent with the subject predicate relationship in the sentence. Let's take that again. Modifiers are said to what? Dangle. Modifiers are said to dangle when they are not consistent with um, the subject predicate relationship in sentence. Now, this means that action attributed to the subject of the sentence cannot normally be performed by the subject. Are we together? Action attributed to the subject, underline the subject. Speaking of dangling modifiers, the action attributed to the subject of the sentence cannot normally be performed by the subject. Now let's take some examples. Now, sitting in the convocation park, a motorcycle flew past. Okay, sitting in the convocation park, a motorcycle flew past. Now, knowledge of sentence structure would make one regard the motorcycle as a subject. Okay, definitely it shouldn't be the subject. All right, the subject of the sentence and the performance of the action of sitting. All right, considering the motorcycle and the performance of sitting, one will consider the sentence structure, all right, as the action. Now, but common sense tells us that motorcycle cannot sit. Okay. Now the phrase sitting in the convocation park therefore dangles. Okay. The phrase sitting in the motor park therefore dangled because this does not logically relate to the subject of the sentence motorcycle. Are we together? Now let's consider this properly. Now it says sitting in the motor park and we have a motorcycle flew past. Now we're talking about dangling modifiers here. Now speaking of which, the sentence structure would make one regard the motorcycle as the subject of the sentence and the performance of the action of sitting, but common sense tells us that motorcycle cannot sit. So the phrase sitting in the convocation park therefore dangles because it does not logically relate to the subject. Okay, it does not logically relate to the subject, motorcycle. So we have that as that. So we also have examples or some other examples like running to the notice board, my score and grades were seen. These are wrong sentences and wrong sentence structures. So we also have feeling completely exhausted, a bed was needed. So we also have meeting Akon for the first time, a mode of dressing repelled me. All right, a mode of dressing repelled me. Now let's note that there is no logical relationship between, all right, the now running to the notice board, underline that. Running to the notice board, underline it. my scores and grade were seen. Now, after you underline that, there should be a comma. Run into the notice board, comma, so you can underline that my scores and grade were seen. Now, feeling completely exhausted, underline that there should be a comma, a bed was needed. Now, meeting Akon for the first time, underline the sentence, then a comma, a mode of dressing repelled me. Now, note that there's no logical relationship between the underlying words or underlying sentence and the subject of each case. Now let's redress these sentences. Running to the notice board, I saw my scores and grade. That's what it's supposed to be. Not my scores and grades were seen. Now, feeling completely exhausted, I decided I needed a bed rest, not a bed was needed. Doesn't go together. Now look at meeting Akon for the first time. I was repelled by a mode of dressing. I was repelled by a mode of dressing, not a mode of dressing repelled me. So we have that as that. So we have some causes of dangling modifiers here. Now, one of the factor is the wrong use of passive voice. All right, when passive voice is applied wrongly. All right. Also, participles which begins a sentence may dangle if not used carefully, as the example shown above, just like we have made mention of. Principal participles that are often used improperly or impersonally, I mean to say, participles that are used impersonally, all right, excuse me, participles that are used impersonally also cause dangling modifier, all right, and these participles include supposing, considering, assuming, admitting, and the likes. So we have that as that. Now let's continue. Okay, so another structure that often dangles is the past participle verb phrases. Let's say that again. Another structure that often dangles is what we call the past participle verb phrases. Now, in the following examples, there are no logical relationship between the past participle verbs and the subject. Now, let's take some example. Identified by the witness, his shame was boundless. Encouraged and deserted by our children, our life became unbearable. Now let's readdress these sentences. It says here, identified by the witness, the criminal's shame was boundless. That's the correct thing. Not identified by the witness is shame. Who are you talking about? Who are you referring to? Now look at the correct statement. Identifying the witness, the criminal's shame, underline the criminal, was boundless. Now, denounced and deserted, okay? Denounced and deserted by our children. Now, you see that it makes more sense. The woman's life became miserable. But it says here, the first one says, denounced and deserted by our children, our life became. No, all right? The woman's life became unmiserable, unbearable, I mean to say. So we have that as that. So now it must be noted that for a modifier not to dangle a subject, now you see that the woman now is not the subject. The woman's life became unbearable. So now it must be noted that for a modifier not to dangle, a subject of the sentence, which is also modified by the modifier, has to be named. So that's it. So we have that as that. And let's take some examples before we call it a wrap for today. So now let's take some other example. It says here, it says, do well in an examination, do well in an examination, studying is necessary. To do well in an examination, studying is necessary. That's one of the wrong statements. To have a successful get together, many guests are required. Another wrong statement. Now let's readdress these statements. Now we have to do well in an examination. the candidate, now the subject is being underlined, the candidate must what? Study. Now, to have a successful get together, one should invite. Now, the wrong statement says to have a successful get together, many guests are required. Now, look at the correct sentence. It says to have a successful get together, one should invite many guests. Now, you see that that is the proper thing to. It makes more sense, and so logically it's okay than what it was before. Excuse me. So we have that as that. So we'll call it wrap here for today, and in our next class we're talking about ambiguity. All right. So thank you very much, everyone. Please, if you might have missed anything in the course of the class, please just do out to take the back, rewind it, and you can always go back and re-access it, so you can grab everything we have discussed in today's class. Thank you very much, everyone. I hope you have been able to gain a thing or two in today's class. Please, let's do well to keep our notes up to date and submit them to the just a moment, so the appropriate quarters. That's one way we get to monitor and observe our progress. I remain your tutor, and I look forward to seeing you all in subsequent tutorials. Do have a wonderful evening. Good night.